Good evening, everybody. Welcome to the channel. I am Brian Lusk. Thank you for joining me today. Glad to have you here. We're going to get rolling right away here. As you can see, I'm still in the hotel room. I expect I'll be here for a few more weeks, so don't expect much to change for at least in that short period of time. So let's go ahead and get rolling with some interesting things, some of which came from the NATO summit that just took place. Jerry, glad to see you here. Thanks for joining me today. Let's go ahead and start off with, let's see, get that switched over here. There we go. This is a statement by Kaja Kallas here, or Kaius, I think is the proper pronunciation.
This war in Ukraine and our response to it actually determines also whether NATO is credible or not, whether it is also acting as deterrence for Russia. Why we don't have a war in NATO's countries is because Russia is not taking up that fight. Why Ukraine is having this war is because they are in the gray zone. They are not under NATO's umbrella. And therefore, my conviction is that Ukraine will have to become a member of NATO when we want to have, get rid of conflicts and the areas of gray zones, because gray zones are sources for the potential conflicts. And I don't think it's good for the peace. So if Russia decides to move on and really use its power to attack, then it's going to attack NATO and not single countries. And this is actually one of the narratives that Russia wants us to buy. This war.
I thought her statement was pretty good. I mean, it's pretty straightforward what the overall risks associated with are. So, really, the truth is that right now Ukraine is in that kind of a gray zone. It's not NATO, but it's not Russia either, and therefore Russia, they will always be subject to Russian attack as long as they are on their own, as they are right now. Now, from Senator Mitt Romney, again, Mitt Romney is a Republican senator from Utah, and apparently President Zelensky will be visiting with the Governors Association there. The National Governors Association will be having a deal in Utah. So the governor of Utah announced that they're honored to welcome President Zelensky and First Lady Zelenska to Utah and the National Governors Association. Utah stands behind Ukraine, and we look forward to hearing his message to the nation's governors. Romney himself stated, "What we are witnessing in Ukraine is indicative of the global fight being waged between authoritarianism and democracy. I welcome President Zelensky and First Lady Zelenska's visit to Utah to speak with our governors from across the country." Interesting visit that Zelensky's making. Kind of an interesting, almost targeted way of doing it, if you ask me. From a political standpoint, when you get below president, the next most powerful person, if the president himself is not working with anything, are really the governors of the states. And if you can get the governors of the states on your side, well, it's going to be a lot easier to get things done. From Mitch McConnell here, almost 40 years ago, President Reagan reminded the world that support for freedom fighters is self-defense. There's no daylight between America's interests and the cause of Ukraine's defense. And he added, proud as always to welcome President Zelensky to the U.S. Senate. What's particularly amazing to me is that these are Republicans. The Republican Senate leader, the Republican senator that are making these statements, not certain members of the Republican Party. It shows that there is a strong bipartisan level of support for Ukraine even now. Then, of course, from the NATO meeting took place, and of course, Russia's foreign minister decided to weigh in on things here. Lavrov stated, if Ukraine joins NATO, either Ukraine disappears or NATO does. An outright threat to the Western powers. Or as Andrew Chikoyan says, a wise man once said, every Russian accusation is a confession. Every Russian threat is a Russian fear. The truth is that Russia fears NATO not because they believe they will fall to NATO. No, Russia fears NATO because they fear that their ambitions for expansion will fall because NATO will not allow them to happen. That's the real issue there. Now let's go ahead and move on to an interesting story that popped up here. And I'm going to start with the Institute for the Study of War's statement on it. Russian authorities reportedly attempted to assassinate leading figures in the European defense industrial base, likely as part of Russian efforts to disrupt and deter Western aid to Ukraine and Russia's wider efforts to destabilize NATO members. CNN reported on July 11th that 5 U.S. and Western officials stated that U.S. intelligence uncovered a Kremlin plan in early 2024 to assassinate German arms manufacturer Rheinmetal CEO Armin Paperger. U.S. intelligence reportedly informed the German government, which was able to foil the plot. CNN reported that the planned assassination against Paperger was one of the multiple plans to kill European defense industrial executives, but that the plot against Paperger was the most mature. European authorities have reported that Russian actors and proxies have conducted sabotage and other hybrid warfare operations aimed at deterring and disrupting Western aid to Ukraine, and NATO and its member states have repeatedly warned about intensifying Russian hybrid operations on NATO member territory. So long story short there, the Russians are taking it to the next level. They're deliberately targeting foreign citizens in other nations, sovereign nations, NATO countries. They've already attacked facilities in NATO countries with irregular warfare methods, sabotage, and other attacks to disrupt Western arms production. Now they're stepping it up to assassinations of Westerners in general. Now, of course, Russia is no stranger to assassinations. They have been don't drink the polonium tea, as they like to say. But this is a new level. Usually they reserve that for people who are bad-mouthing Russia, especially former Russian citizens. And some journalists, too. I mean, I'll be honest with that. This is kind of taking it to the next level. As Igor Sushko states, Russia tried to assassinate Rheinmetal CEO in Germany. Russia is waging a war against the free world, and we are still pretending otherwise. If our leaders are too scared to face this reality, at least arm Ukraine to wage a proper war to defend us. He also added underneath, our government's response to Russia actively waging a war on us. We don't want to see this war escalate, so we will prevent Ukraine from actually defeating Russia. And from Tyndar, we've got Russian terrorist activities in the West are steadily increasing to a degree where even an attempt to murder the CEO of Rheinmetall is planned. It clearly shows the Russian recklessness. Armin Paperger is, for obvious reasons, one of the most painful thorns in Russia's side. Russia declared war on the West. This foiled terrorist attack is only the latest episode of this undeniable fact. If not countered in a meaningful way, those reckless attempts will only increase. The most effective deterrence is Russia's clean defeat. Now, I had a personal experience with a bully when I was a kid. Now, I've always been a big kid for in multiple ways, so the story summary is that at the bus stop, the local bully, who was about 5'2", soaking wet, about 100 pounds, but he had friends, or I should say accomplices, decided to pick on me. And it was ongoing for a little bit, and each day it was getting worse. Till the day he touched me. He tried to make it physical. And so we got into a fight. I confronted him directly. It was the stupidest fight ever. but nobody had ever had the guts to stand up to him. So this stupid fight, which I'm not going to describe here, took place. And after that, the bully's power was gone. Now, some people tried to make me into the next bully, tried to make me the person who was going to go around beating kids up. But no, that's not who I am, and that's not how I'm supposed to, that I work. But the key, again, is that if you face the bully and you knock the bully back, you don't even have to get really violent with him. You have to face him down and stop them outright. Then the bully ends up having his power removed. And right now, Russia remains the bully because we are not facing them directly. Moving on, the most surprising thing about this is all the people who find it extraordinary. For over 2 years, the Russian government has said that they're at war with the West. All the evidence has indicated that they mean it. What do people think that means? And this is a more official report on it from Financial Times. NATO diplomats have confirmed a report that Russia plotted to assassinate the head of Europe's largest arms manufacturer over his company's support for Ukraine, as concerns rise about the Kremlin's sabotage campaign. So this is how far it's gotten. To even pretend that we are not targets of Russian aggression at this point in time is to merely deny the facts, straight up. All right, so let's go ahead and keep it trucking here for a little bit longer. A little bit of news out of Ukraine, so let's go ahead and pop into that. Ukraine's arms enterprise signs agreement with Northrop Grumman to set up munitions production. I believe this is the first U.S. company to actually start setting up a production line in Ukraine. The signing took place during a meeting between President Zelensky and representatives of top U.S. defense firms on his visit to Washington. So this means that significant U.S. weapons will now be able to be produced in Ukraine on Ukrainian production lines under the auspices of Northrop Grumman. In other news, Ukraine's Reserve Plus app has registered 2.7 million people who have updated their information. This is how they're doing their call-ups in Ukraine at this point in time. Approximately 90 to 100,000 citizens update their data online every day. Obviously, that means there will be people keeping their records updated, not adding that many people. Let's move over to the Okhmadut Children's Hospital for a few brief moments here. All buildings of the Okhmadut Children's Hospital were damaged in a Russian strike on July 8th. One of them cannot be restored. In total, over 800 million hryvnias, or $19 million, have been received for restoration. These are funds from the hospital's charity accounts and state funds. They'll be selecting a company to reconstruct the building or to carry out the construction soon. This should tell you how generous the people of Ukraine truly are. Hang on, got to get the translation done here. Now, you might note that you're probably familiar with the picture right there. That is, of course, Ronald Reagan. In Kyiv, activists initiated the issue of erecting a monument to the 40th President of the United States, Ronald Reagan. Reagan, who called the USSR an evil empire, is known for his steadfast struggle against Soviet totalitarianism and communism. His efforts played a key role in ending the Cold War and, as a result, contributed to Ukraine gaining independence in 1991. This is also, as Informed Napalm states, quite good trolling, which will simultaneously bombard the Russians and give clear hints to the United States that people like Reagan, with a steel will and a desire to effectively fight against totalitarian regimes and not play with them in submissions. Ronald Reagan directly addressed Ukraine at various points in his presidency, and he was completely clear about his support for the Ukrainian people. Wouldn't it be nice to have a Ronald Reagan in charge now. The Ukrainians captured a Russian multi-million-dollar T-90 tank in the eastern sector. The T-90 is their most modern variant, and this is the T-90M of tank that they actually have in production and use in Ukraine. Their T-14 Armata tank was intended to replace it, but they still have not managed to get that into significant serial production. In the meantime, the T-90M is their latest tank and remains their most high-tech that they have on the battlefield. A complete capture of it is a great thing for Ukraine to pull off. By the way, the vehicle showing there does not appear to be a T-90. The gun's too small. So the picture's just wrong. Either way, pretty cool. Then there's the Russian propagandists. And I had an interesting conversation earlier today online with somebody who was like, oh, that's just all right-wing, far right-wing propaganda, nationalist propaganda. You can't really rely on that. The Russian people don't say those types of things. But these are the people that Russia listened to. Russian propagandists say the Okhmedit Children's Hospital strike was a Western false flag. They have tried so far to claim that it was a Ukrainian air defense missile, an American missile, that it was not a Russian missile, that it was a military target, because actually, I think I forgot to mention this the other day, Belarus claimed about 4 months ago that they were using the children's hospital as a military base, without proof, I might add. But now they're even going so far as to call it a Western false flag. So how were we supposed to pull that off with Russia's premier, a KH-101 missile? Just saying. Ukraine's GDP grew by more than 4% in 6 months, and this is due to the high adaptability to difficult conditions and experience in responding to such challenges. The Ukrainian economy continued to grow in June. That's quite the feat in wartime to keep growing their actual economy. Let's go ahead and move on to the news out of Russia itself. I don't think I've got a ton, so just a few items here. Another witness against Deputy Defense Minister Ivanov is dead. Igor Kotelnikov played a major role in that whole construction kickback scheme we talked about a while back, where they'd basically get one company to construct a building up to like 80%. Then they would kick that company out, saying it's not going to work. After they've taken all the kickbacks they can, another company would then get the full price of building that building, and then they would kick that back to the Ministry of Defense people here. Anyway, so that scheme, which over $100 billion was stolen from the Ministry of Defense budget, he mysteriously died from a blood clot in the CISO-4 prison in Moscow. These blood clots seem to be a repeating thing in people who are opposed to the Russian regime or otherwise embarrassing to it. Apologize for the water bottle here. It's been hot over here, and I've been a little bit dehydrated trying to get caught back up. A vehicle repair plant, Novotrans, is on fire in the Kashira, Moscow region. Quite the fire. I understand that this is from earlier today. So just seems like there's a lot of these types of fires happening in Russia right now. Then there's this little tidbit. We're following reports of a Superjet crash outside of Moscow. Reports indicate that this was RA 89049, owned by Gazpromovia, and currently undergoing testing after modifications to a Superjet new variant. We did not receive the transponder data from this flight. There's been a couple of notes on this one. In particular, it looks like it didn't have passengers on board. This was a test flight with just pilots and probably flight engineer. On Friday afternoon in Kolomna near Moscow, the Sukhoi Superjet 100 airplane of the Gazpromovia airline crashed. The airliner, after repairs, took off for a test flight from Lukovsky Airport and was heading to Vnukovo Airport. There were no passengers on board. 3 crew members, the pilot in command, co-pilot, and I guess it was a flight attendant, my apologies, died. The plane had been in service since 2015, and it's been in periodic maintenance since May of this year. As TASS news agency assures, the cause of the crash could have been engine failure. But engine failure does not lead to a crash. That is, there were some cumulative causes because a twin-engine airplane, even an empty one, can be flown with one engine. The engineer notes that the SSJ-100 engine hot section was produced in France, but due to sanctions, deliveries are no longer made. There's a bunch of foreign-made parts in this thing. So they've been trying to kind of outfit their jets and equipment with Russian-made equivalents. At the time, the Russian authorities announced plans to import substitute foreign components. Among them were avionics, landing gear, and safety equipment. In May 2024, it became known that certification of the fully import substituted SSJ new aircraft was postponed until 2025. This is some of the footage from the crash scene right here. So, newly repaired and upgraded, I will say, SSJ-100 went down with all hands, just 3, during effectively its test flight. Engine failure would not explain it unless it was a dual engine failure, and that would probably indicate something like fuel line issues or something like that. Even so, even with a dual engine failure, they should have been able to bring it in for a controlled landing, which, I mean, obviously they went into some trees if this is the location, and that would totally wreck the plane. But they could have done something, I think, even as gliding a big jet like that. Either way, it looks like those sanctions are taking place and carrying out their necessary damages to the Russian economy. This is additional information on the same one. This is where somebody is pointing out that are sanctions still ineffective, considering what we're seeing. Now, I'm not going to celebrate the crash and death of 3 civilian crew members, but it does show that those sanctions are having their ongoing, continuing effect on Russia, and they're trying to ignore them as best they can and suffering for the attempts. Hi, Robbie. Glad to have you. Always glad to have you on board for the stream today. The Russian Federation has long been planning an attack on Ukrainian children. The Belarusian KGB. This is going back to the. I mentioned this earlier when we talked about Okmedit Hospital there. This is where I got the information stating that Belarus tried to claim that terrorists, quote, were hiding in the Ukrainian medical institutions, including this children's hospital. They even went so far as to identify a specific street where the children's hospital was located back in April of this year. So they were preparing the ground for this attack for quite some time, which tells me that that was a premeditated attack, and thus not only a war crime, but a deliberate one at that. Ukrainian forces struck the Russian-occupied Mariupol International Airport outside of Mariupol. You could see smoke rising above the airfield from multiple locations around the city. I have some unofficial word that they might have actually struck the runway itself, but I don't have any confirmation on that yet, just the unofficial words on it. Now, here's where Russia's trying to set up a narrative for yet another one of their destroyed dam specials. Kyiv is preparing to destroy the dams of the Kyiv and Kaniv reservoirs, according to the Russian Foreign Ministry spokesperson Zakharova. As Anton Herashchenko states, this is a favorite Russian tactic of the Russians to accuse Ukraine of a crime Russia is planning to commit. This was the case when the Kovka hydroelectric power plant dam was blown up. The destruction of Kyiv hydroelectric power plant is one of the favorite scare stories of Z's propagandists. So they're setting the stage for yet another one of their amazing, we totally didn't do this thing that we totally predicted in advance and said that we were totally not going to be doing. I'm still trying to figure out how this is supposed to be a, quote, cynical provocation against Russia. Russia, I mean, for heaven's sakes, even the Kakhovka hydroelectric power plant, there was video of Russian soldiers going into it and setting the charges. And they tried to hold that fiction for so long that it was actually Ukraine that destroyed the dam. No, if it just gets destroyed, it's Russia doing it. All right, moving on to the international front for just a little bit here. If you ever wondered what Zelensky would look like in a suit, well, now's your chance. Whoops, not that. Let's get back to that. Get back to my web browser there. That's what he would look like in a suit right there. Is it just me, or does he look really uncomfortable in that? But he is reported in for his assignment as the ambassador to the UK, and is ready to get to work. Okay, there we go. Come on. Oop. All right. I'm still getting used to using my cell phone for this, so bear with me here. Over in Australia, a Russian couple was charged with espionage. Australian Army Private Kira Korolovia secretly traveled to Russia and had her husband back in Australia log into her work account and share classified information with the FSB. So why in the world did they even have remote access for the spouse of a military member to get into this information? Seems like Australia is going to have to work on their IT security measures. The International Fund for Ukraine has entered into an agreement for the purchase of artillery ammunition for Ukraine worth £300 million. This will include up to 120,000 rounds of newly produced 152 millimeter artillery ammunition. This is a bunch of countries involved in this, but overall, Ukraine still has plenty of the 152 millimeter Soviet-style artillery pieces that they can use, and therefore they've got plenty of use for 152 millimeter ammunition. The Australian government has announced its largest single military assistance package to Ukraine, worth nearly $250 million. This includes air defense missiles, air-to-ground and anti-tank weapons, artillery, mortar cannon, and small arms ammunition. Ukraine then expressed their gratitude to Australia for it. Even Lithuania sent another military aid package, this time with small arms ammunition. This would be 5.56 ammunition and folding cots. And you don't think about the little details like cots and stuff like that, but they're still needed. The normal supplies of keeping soldiers in the field also need to be supplied, not just the guns, the bullets, and the bombs. U.S. Secretary of Defense Lloyd Austin held a phone conversation with Russian Defense Minister Andrei Belousov. According to the Pentagon, this would be the second one in the past month. They reportedly discussed issues of preventing security threats and reducing the risk of potential escalation. Not sure how I feel about that conversation taking place. U.S. President Joe Biden stated that European allies are ready to reduce investments in China if Beijing continues to support Russia, according to Bloomberg. The head of the White House issued this warning after NATO accused China of aiding Russia's invasion of Ukraine, which there's been plenty of standing evidence is going on. So later on, China declared that they had nothing to do with helping Russia with their invasion, that it was all false accusations and all this kind of stuff. Tells you that they are. It's one of those. The more they deny it, the more likely it is they're doing it. Then there's Viktor Orban. I mentioned the other day he paid a visit to Zelensky, then went to Putin. Then I believe he headed over to Xi Jinping, and then a trip to the U.S. to meet with Donald Trump. Orban wrote that it was an honor to visit Trump at his residence in Florida. We discussed ways to make peace. The good news of the day, he's going to solve it. A very vague promise, at best. And I will point out that as a private citizen, Donald Trump has no authority to speak for the U.S. as a country. This, I believe, is a violation of U.S. law. Italian Prime Minister Giorgia Meloni commented on Hungarian Prime Minister Viktor Orban's, quote, peace meetings. Basically, she said he has no authority to carry those out, and he has not been authorized in any way to carry out this type of diplomacy. The UN General Assembly has supported a resolution proposed by Ukraine demanding that Russia immediately withdraw its troops from the Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant and return it to the full control of Kyiv. I don't believe that this will do anything at this point in time. After all, Russia is currently heading the UN Security Council for their 6-month stint. But overall, at least the UN did something, even if it was just pass a little resolution. Then there's been a couple of arms things that have been popping up. For one thing, there was a request for proposal or for a intermediate range missile, ballistic missile for the U.S. And then it was later said that this was specifically being designed for the use in Ukraine. Now, France, Germany, Italy, and Poland have agreed to jointly develop a long-range cruise missile. This is meant to have a range of over 500 kilometers to fill the gap in European arsenals. Now, understand that for the longest time, we kind of had this tacit agreement with Russia that we would not build weapons in that intermediate range, somewhere around 500 kilometers. We would keep our stuff shorter than that or significantly, intercontinental range. That means that we've got this gap in our capabilities. Now, we all know that the ATACMS missiles are capable of going farther than that limit. But the U.S. was deliberately restricting them down to below that limit. Now, it looks like the other countries are stepping up their game. South Korea has decided to double their contributions to NATO's Ukraine fund. It's not a huge amount of money. It's now up to $24 million as opposed to 12 before. But at least it's a start for donating material and supplies and money to help out Ukraine in this war. They were really incensed with North Korea started getting assistance from Russia. South Korea had kind of been playing things pretty, trying to keep things as on a positive note with Russia as they could. And now Russia's throwing all that stuff under the bridge. Several thousand people. Let's see. Yes, this is an interesting one right here. Poland has set up a foreign legion where Ukrainians could sign up, get fully trained, fully equipped, and potentially then be sent to serve in Ukraine. It's an interesting setup here. And the deal is, from what I'm understanding, is that there are many people, many Ukrainians in Poland who are happy to serve their country, but they don't want to be just, taken up and chucked on the front lines untrained. So this gives them the opportunity to sign up and fulfill their service to their country to help defend it, but make sure they're trained first, fully and completely, plus given a relevant equipment. Quite an interesting little setup. So good on Poland for carrying that off. All right, now let's go ahead and move over to the front lines for a little bit here. Now, the report is that Ukraine will not be ready to launch a counteroffensive or take back large territories from Russia until 2025 due to slow weapons deliveries. That's right, the West has been slow walking supplies for quite some time now, and that is going to mean that Ukraine's not going to have the abilities to carry out large-scale offensive operations. Now, Ukraine's really good at finding ways to pull that off anyway, so we may still see some actions taking place, but if the Western powers had provided more equipment, this could be on the cards for this year, not putting off till next. Now, this defense intelligence update is an interesting little bit here. The average daily Russian casualties killed and wounded in Ukraine throughout May and June 2024 increased to conflict highs of 1,262 and 1,163, respectively. In total, Russia likely lost killed and wounded in excess of 70,000 3,000 personnel over the past 2 months. In fact, we've seen reports of men on crutches, of sporting heavy wounds going into battle for Russia up in the Kharkiv region. So they're still even using their wounded to carry out assaults at this point in time. The uptick in losses reflect Russia's opening of the new front in the Kharkiv region while maintaining the same rate of offensive operations along the remainder of the front. Although this new approach has increased the pressure on the front line, an effective Ukrainian defense and a lack of Russian training reduces Russia's ability to exploit any tactical successes, despite attempting to stretch the front line further. Russia's casualty rate will likely continue to average above 1,000 a day over the next 2 months as Russia continues to try to overmatch Ukrainian positions with mass. Then there's this item from the Kyiv Independent talking about the situation over near, I believe it's Chasiv Yar. And I'm just going to read the kind of the first paragraph or two. Outgunned and outmanned, Ukrainian soldiers struggling to hold the front line in a brutal months-long Russian siege of Chasiv Yar are increasingly worried about their army's ability to protect their rear. If key supply lines from the west are cut off and if troops to their south are overrun, they risk being choked. It would be critical if the main road for resources, ammunition, and everything is captured, or if the Russians approach closer to it, according to a sergeant in an artillery unit deployed near Chasiv Yar. After retreating west from the Donetsk Oblast city of Bakhmut just over 1 year ago, Ukraine's forces have used the higher ground around Chasiv Yar to inflict massive losses on advancing Russian troops who this spring made incursions into the town's eastern outskirts. But the predicament for Ukrainian troops struggling to hold Chasiv Yar worsened in the past weeks after a poorly organized rotation of Ukrainian soldiers to the south allowed Russian forces to advance towards the Ukraine-held towns of Toretsk and New York. So this is the situation over there, and they're starting to get concerned that they may have their supply lines cut, resulting in effective encirclement for them. So overall, the situation in Chasiv Yar continues to get a little bit worse each day. The Ukrainians are fighting brilliantly, I would say, as best they can. But even when you fight your best, there's going to be gaps and holes. Let's go ahead and move on to the deep state map. This is kind of weird to operate on a cell phone here. The Ukrainian Defense Forces drove the enemy out of Sodnitsia Kozachok. Ooh. Let's go ahead and hit that tag there and see if we can get it pulled up. There we go. The new deep state map is a lot harder to use than the old one was, at least. So that is located, okay, that's right on the border of Russia. So Russia apparently managed to pull off a little bit of an advance through there, and Ukraine finally managed to push the Russians back out of there. Yeah, that's right on the edge there. They also report the Russians have advanced near Vodozenka, Yurlivka, and Razdlivka and Novoselivka, Persha. Fighting continues in Orozhine and Krasnodarivka. So that's kind of some overall stuff. We'll talk about those as we get to them in the other updates. Now, War Gonzo, let me get this translation done here. One of these days, I'm going to learn Russian and Ukrainian and become proficient in those languages, but not today, unfortunately. The Zaporizhia front, no significant changes. Long-range weapons are in operation on both sides. Basically, no major changes. Donetsk is where War Gonzo reports the most changes. With Konstantinivka, no significant changes. Krasnodarivka, the Russians managing to continue to push further and further. In Karlivka, heavy fighting continues on the outskirts, but he doesn't note that there's any change in the lines of control. In the area of Novoselivka, Pervaya, Russian troops continue to improve their positions for a further assault on the settlement. With further advances from Yevgenivka, I'm not sure what the Ukrainian name is there, and Voshkod, where the Russian armed forces have, quote, completed the cleansing of the previously occupied positions of the Ukrainian armed forces. In New York, the Russian armed forces are also developing an offensive. There are tactical successes. So things in the Donetsk area continue to be troublesome for Ukraine. The interesting thing I've bumped into the other day is that apparently once the Russians find a problematic spot, they're actually tunneling into the areas. The tunnel underground, they dig in behind the Ukrainian lines, and then they pop up behind and carry out an assault that way. Quite the significantly quite the unusual use of this tactic. I'll put it that way. Wargonzo also reports that Chasiv Yar continues to be a problem. Kharkiv, they just talked about lots of fighting, but no changes. Let's go ahead and move on to... This should be null reports here. Great. Flybok, the new geolocated footage confirms our earlier assessments. Ukrainian forces have advanced into the northern part of Flyboka. Fighting is ongoing in the center of the settlement, but overall we're looking at Ukraine making significant progress in kicking the Russians out. Yevenivka Sokil, the Russian forces have advances south of Yevenivka after taking control of Sokil. In the area, Russians are rapidly advancing as Ukraine is taking up new defensive positions that are situated more west. In Krasnodarivka, the situation was updated. The area in the southeast that was previously considered a gray zone due to a local Ukrainian counterattack is once again occupied by Russia. The Russians also moved into the center coming from the east. As they say, the situation does not look good. And that's kind of the overall situation on the front lines, continuing to be a very challenging situation in the east, whereas in the north, it appears that Ukraine appears to be taking control of the situation. And that, we've just got the interesting extras today, and I've got a few good ones here. I think you might appreciate some of these. Let me show you the world's first surface-to-air fisheye. Let me go ahead and get this video pulled up again here. The Russian drone found a fisherman here, and the fisherman saw the drone and pegged it with a fish. Quite the arm on that guy. The drone, unfortunately, was not lost, but it did manage to recover and continue monitoring the fisherman. No report on whether anything happened after that. From Anton Herashchenko, he has publishing some of the information from Russian propagandist Andrei Perla, published this by him in this article called "A Children's Hospital in Kyiv is Not an Accident. It's time to recognize that and stop being afraid." So here's the quotes of a Russian propagandist here. "We must take into account simply and scarily there are no people on that side. Not one person. Our missiles don't kill people. There's not one person there. Unhumans are there." That's right out of World War II, if you know what I'm saying. If we don't accept that as a given, if we don't forbid ourselves to consider them humans, to feel sorry for them, save them, we will weaken ourselves. So simple and scary, we must not just justify ourselves for the strike on the Children's Hospital. We must say, do you want this to stop? Give up, capitulate, and then maybe we will spare you. Note the maybe there. Pretty sure we know how much sparing there will be taken care of. Maybe it's time we agree that there's no civilian population on that side of the Dnipro and turn their cities into Gaza with a simple and clear goal to save our children from death. There's an easy way to save your children from death, and that is for your soldiers to leave Ukraine right now. Make no mistake, if Russia didn't want children to die, they would not have their soldiers on Ukrainian territory now. That simple. From Anton, though, he states the only thing Russia understands and accepts is power. When it senses weakness, it becomes stronger and believes it can get away with anything. As I said before, the strike on the Children's Hospital was deliberate and thought-out war crime. It was a message. Russia is stronger than NATO. Putin is convinced of that, and this week has reinforced his conviction. Ukrainian armed forces are standing between global order and global collapse. Putin believes he is unstoppable. Can the West prove him wrong? Powerful words by Mr. Hershchenko. This bit from Matthew Light is very interesting. I'll try to summarize it as best as I can. I'll start with this first paragraph here. Having recently spent a few weeks in Poland and Estonia, I formed the impression that the Russian invasion of Ukraine has transformed neighboring countries in ways that the U.S. and Western governments completely fail to grasp. 2 years of war have radically reshaped expectations. From the Estonian colleague who calmly told me that there will be a Russia-NATO war in the next few years, in which Estonia will be partially or completely destroyed, to the Polish mother who no longer wants her son to pursue a military career, people are drawing conclusions. They're concluding that NATO is feckless and cannot or will not deter Russia. They are questioning whether their own institutions and allies are up to the challenges confronting them, and they are factoring likelihood of war into their own life plans in ways that shocked me. This is what a weak response to Russia's provocations, the avoiding escalation, the fact that we did not send a war-winning aid package on day one. We let Russia do it. We let Russia continue. Russia should be suing for peace right now. Russia should be leaving Ukraine with its tail between its legs if we had the power and will to take care of the needs of the Ukrainian people and keep our word. But no, instead of slugging the bully in the nose, we said, just let him keep going. We said, no, that's just not that big a deal. You can touch me. It's not that big a deal. I just don't want you to mess with that, with anything else. And every time we do that, we step back, the bully advanced. Because the bully knew that you and I would never throw the punch. And that makes the bully bold. It's sad that our allies are asking themselves, is it worth it? Over in the Russian ambassador's residence in Washington, D.C., someone wrote child killers on the side of the residence. Seems like it's unfortunately appropriate. Then we've got President Biden. If you were paying attention to the recent press conference, he called President Zelensky, he called him President Putin. He did catch himself and correct himself, but that was not the only mistake he made in that press conference. He continues to look very weak in front of the world. But let's do something a little bit more upbeat here for just a moment or two. I don't like being on the down in the dumps here. This is a Russian Tor air defense system trying to shoot down a Ukrainian drone and failing to do so. You can watch the missile go right past the camera. I believe then that air defense system was then destroyed shortly after. It's gotten bad enough that even Ukraine soldiers are weighing whether Biden should step aside. Now, I'm going to briefly delve into U.S. politics here for just a moment. I won't be long. For the first time in our history, we have a commander-in-chief that has to be in bed by 8, or he's non-functional, that cannot reliably carry out a press conference without needing assistance. The bar has gotten so low. Is this truly what our commander-in-chief is? I'm not going to make any calls on what should be done, not on this stream. But understand, we look really weak right now. And the bullies, they know it. So do the soldiers in Ukraine. Already did that one, talked about it. It's a cute shot there. And we'll end off with this cat. In Kyiv, a cat was rescued from under the rubble of a destroyed residential building as a result of a Russian missile strike. He was under the rubble for a day and a half and suffered a concussion. There have been reports that his family was killed by Russia in that strike, mom, son, and daughter. But even so, Ukrainians still take care of their pets, of their animals. No matter what, they don't allow war to destroy their hearts. And that's everything for today. Thank you so much for joining me today. Glad to have you here. Always glad to have you guys piping in. I do realize this situation with the cell phone is kind of a little bit weird and different, but hopefully it's continuing to get the information across to you. And in a few weeks, I'll be back in front of my normal computer, and we'll be able to pick up with a more traditional way of doing this. And on that note, thank you. You guys have a great rest of your day, and we'll see you on the next video.